New mixer, filter plus, new distortions, lots of things that have been added that are really welcome features are now within Bitwig 5.1. And what I'm happy about the most is that these are features that I've requested in the past about wanting them to implement, and it seems like they really kind of took those ideas and made their own spin on them. There's a couple more things that I wish that they would add that I think that they could probably get away with within the next like 5.1 update if they wanted to. I don't know about coding, so there's that. But today, you and I, my friends, are going to be taking a look at Bitwig 5.1 and the majority of updates that they have to offer. If you're brand new to the channel, my name is Alckemy. Welcome. We do lots of Bitwig / kilohertz stuff / sound design, heavy drums, neurobass, you name it, whatever. But I also like to do reviews and like to keep people updated with what's going on within the world of Bitwig. So be sure to like and subscribe. If you want to support the channel, you could consider using my affiliate link. I've got plenty of stuff on my website, or if you have watched videos from some of your other content creators, maybe use their affiliate link to get your hands on Bitwig, because it's worth it. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the newest features. The first thing that you are taking a look at is the new Filter Plus. Now, one of my biggest feature requests was to be able to use the distortion units that were in the grid and have a way that you can swap them out. And now, take a look. Not only did they add all those cool things that were only available within the grid, but they actually added 5 new distortion units, and some of them are actually clippers. Now, unfortunately, this is a minor complaint, but this doesn't actually clip in the way that I would want it to. For example, what clipping means is that once it pushes to a ceiling, it's going to start to chop the peaks off and keep it from going over the 0 dB mark, which this does not do, both either on the heat or on the push. But that being said, the way that it sounds sonically is pretty nice. But just as a means of an example, we've got this respace. Now let's go ahead and clip it. You can see that, generally speaking, if we're not pushing this too hard, then it will reduce the signal by quite a bit, but it's not foolproof. And we're going to probably break this and show you, but let's go ahead and just listen to the distortion itself. Let's go ahead and cycle through some of these new ones. I don't really want to talk so much about these different characters and whatnot, but just the fact that you've got a lot of different distortions to kind of jump through. This one is the heat. And even though these are probably just going crazy bonkers, which actually that's not too bad, it still sounds really nice even once it starts peaking. And technically speaking, like there's this whole thing about like digital clipping not really being a thing and whatnot, but it's very technical. But just for the means of keeping track, I still would like these models to be able to be like, nope, once it hits that 0, it's going to cut it off. There's also some anti-aliasing modes. I think that by nature, most of the Bitwig stuff has anti-aliasing built into it anyways. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but it's nice that it's just an extra feature. So one thing in particular that I think is really cool, I guess I'll just kind of go through these very quickly and then go back to this concept, but this is the soar. Let's go ahead and demo the howl. This one's kind of cool. It's kind of self-explanatory. And keep in mind that we're just doing this on a neurobass, so you're going to definitely want to go and try this out on different kinds of basses, different kinds of sounds, drums, XYZ, but even still, it's pretty nice, and I'll talk more about that here in just a second. This one is shred. This one's a little bit more noisier. Now, one thing that I think is really cool about this, which I've made a couple of videos about, is that if you use something like the diode and it has bias built into it, then what you can do is actually do something like this to where you duplicate this chain and then set the bias to the opposite side. And now what you've got are 2 parallel filters that are changing the bias on both sides of the waveform. Now, what that basically means is you can control the processing that happens on the top of the waveform and on the bottom of the waveform. And this is really nice because this is like a really easy way to do something that I was only exploring within Phaseplant. But if you take a look at this, maybe let's go ahead and change this into a sine wave just to make this a little bit more clear. So we're gonna do this. Now check this out. Close out of that. All right, so right now it's perfectly matched. Let's go ahead and just change one side. And let me... There we go. Now, if you look at this waveform, you'll see that it's not symmetrical. And so once we start changing this into something different, let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like. You can see that we can start to manipulate this and change it. If I wanted to maybe filter the bottom end, you see how we're creating these bipolar style waveforms now, which I think is pretty interesting. Because the wave is all messed up, and granted there's some DC offset that you're running into, but even still, from manipulating the bias this way and then maybe even putting something different like, I don't know, a different kind of distortion, maybe we can use another filter plus and see if we can just get a very dramatic different kind of sound, then you can manipulate some really cool stuff. Ah, there we go. That's really cool. So even still, this is just one way to kind of do something like this. It's not the only way, but it does make for some really cool and interesting things that you can kind of introduce with this. And that being said, like if you were to change out the filters, or if you were to add different kinds of distortion on top of this, or different processing effects, maybe even stereo things, then there's a whole world that you can jump into from having this available. Now, within this, it's also neat that if you're building a really complex style of bass, then you've got this companion of distortion and filtering that you can swap between while you're using these modulators and whatnot to basically build, like, imagine an EQ filter. So imagine something like this. Sorry, I'm nerding out already, but this is just why this is a big deal to me. But if you had a crazy filter shape, kind of like so, imagine if all of these had their own distortion shapes that were built into them as well. This isn't the first time that we've seen something like that. Some other use cases would be something like Volcano. For example, if we were to pull up Volcano, all of these have a individual distortion type along with them. So if you look, this says hard, classic, raw. Another example of this could be something akin to the nonlinear filter, which it's not quite a nonlinear. This is not a nonlinear filter by any means, but there's different distortion types that are accompanied with this. And so now Bitwig has their own that has actually quite a lot of flexibility, because not only do we have the different distortion types, but we've also got 4 new filter types that will give you some extra characteristics in between. So let's go ahead and delete this, and we are going to be taking a look at a respace again, because you all know that this is my kind of sound. And with this, let's go ahead, we'll talk about that in just a second. Let's go ahead and bring this filter plus back up. And let's take a look at what some of these new filters are. So Fizz is kind of a noisy one. It's got some feedback built into it. Be very careful with how you stack some of these. I've already like almost blown my ears out. So please put a limiter at the end, put some kind of clipper, something of the sort, because this can get super dangerous when you start stacking this stuff. But for any case, there is an attenuator on here, which is kind of cool, which is the amount from the internal LFO. These can be in stereo if you want them to. There's an alternate color that some of these have built into them. But what's really cool is that these all have their own kind of character to them. So they're not just regular low pass filters. If I were to turn this off, then it's not so crazy. But once we get into the character, or the color rather, kind of sounds like a phaser type sound. Let's go ahead and check the rasp out. I really like that you can change between bandpass on here and stuff, because you can get some really fat sounds. And I love that these aren't like super over the top resonant. Pretty cool. Let's go ahead and try the ripple. Now, this one you really got to be careful with. The fire, which one is this? Yeah, so the fire one in particular has a tendency to give a constant feedback. So I don't know if that's just a bug or if that's actually just part of the way this filter works, but when you're working with this, if you're trying the beta out, be very careful. So within this though, you've got earth, wind, and fire. Do you remember? Just kidding. But it will create kind of a, I also want to say that it's kind of like a phasery type of sound, hence the name ripple. Maybe let's try negative. Yeah, kind of almost like a flanger-ish. That one's a little more smooth. Let's go ahead and try the wind. Now, I'm not really doing anything extra to this, but can you hear how fat that is? Even just the filter itself, like that makes it dramatically bigger. Now I know that we've got this little default tri filter on this, but this was actually to showcase a very small thing that is a nice quality of life update. These now have the solo and mute on all of the multi effects, which is a huge win. So if I'm wanting to do some mid-side processing to this, let's say I wanted some chorus on the side of these, just to make the sound a little bit thicker, then I can actually solo this and throw in my chorus now. As you can see, nothing is happening, so I have to add just a touch of stereo to this, which we'll do in just a second. But I can add my chorus plus, whatever, and solo, see how that sounds. And to do that, we're just going to add just a touch of another one here, very low. And we're just going to spread that out, kind of like so. And now this has something to bite on. And I can solo that, which is super cool. Before, I had to turn this down. I actually just did it out of habit, but I don't have to do that anymore because now we've got an even bigger sound that gave this a little bit of oomph and width on the sides. So the last one that I want to talk about is actually, to me, the most interesting. We now have this crazy vowel filter that is very reminiscent and probably more versatile in a lot of cases than the... I guess not, but in a lot of ways, more versatile than the wow filter. So if you look here, there's by default 3 different vowels that you can morph from. Now they have these really cool descriptions on here between all these different vowels that like give you the actual kind of sound. So, you know, this little AE type thing is like a ha type sound. This is a R type sound. This is a I, and you know, all that in between. And I really like that because some of these I believe are like derivative of Latin, and I didn't know like what they actually sound like other than trying to make them seem like, you know, like, okay, I know what an E is, I know what an A is, but you know what I mean? Like I never knew what these actual sounds were supposed to be. So the fact that they gave you an example is really cool. And you can, again, morph between all of these and up to 5, which is pretty sick. So, you know, you also have some routing options here. You've got cascade, low pass, and band pass, and then low pass, band pass, and high pass on here, to where that will change the characteristic of how all these work. Then you've also got different people options, I guess. So women 1, 2, female, men 1, 2, male, and kids, that you can kind of like morph in between. So now I am curious. So what's really cool about this too, and this just makes this like insane, is that you can actually modulate or LFO or, you know, modulate or whatever, even on the outside, different formants, I think would be the right way to say that, or different vowels or different means of transferring this into like just a crazy filter that's going to do all different kinds of morphing. Now, obviously, that's an extreme case, and you wouldn't really need to do that. But one thing that I think is probably one of the most beneficial, just from even if these were all just regular filters, is that now we have a mix. So typically in the past, we weren't able to do something like that. And even within things like kilohertz, I struggle, or I've had to find these workarounds because there was no mix. So if you're using something like a bandpass, you would be forced to have to do something like this, to where you've got, you know, just a tad of the original signal, and then you've got your filter right here that's doing the bandpass stuff and having to pull that back. But now you don't have to do that. You can just pull back on this mix. And I wish that more companies would do stuff like this, because it makes it a lot more convenient in order to do parallel processing. But this is a huge win, even though it's like a small quality of life thing. So in any case, go jump in with these different kinds of filters. I know that we're not doing like super crazy examples and like, look how cool this is, but just from a conceptual standpoint, there's a lot to dig into here that you just kind of have to try on your own favorite sounds. So with that, we also have this cool rack called Sweep, which is 2 filters and then a distortion in the middle. So I initially complained that I would have liked the distortion to be on the outside of the filter as opposed to being beforehand, because you can't use these as a standalone device. It's not that big of a deal, but just know that it's a thing. So it is cool that they at least gave you this alternative to where now you can not only send a filter into the distortion, but you can also have two filters now that you can mix and match and morph in between. Also, this animation is hella smooth. I just wanted to say, like, I really like that. Very small thing, but I think is interesting. But other than that, this works the exact same way, but now this is just two. And then you can also use this to change the overall cutoff between both. So if this one is like kind of here, this one's kind of here, maybe we'll run these in parallel. Maybe what we can do is set this one to a bandpass, set this one to a bandpass, but maybe in just different increments. So you can kind of see that's a little bit more obvious to see that this can kind of move in between. You can also pan these out to different stereos, which is kind of cool. And then even more so, what's even more interesting is that you have your pre and post effects. So you can nest devices in here. Obviously that's expected with Bitwig, but that's freaking awesome. There are these envelope followers and LFOs that are built into these respectively. I think that it would be nice if you could just like change this to random or whatever. It's very basic, and like considering the huge modulation update that we just got, I'm kind of confused as to why this exists. But even still, you know, if you just want a quick LFO, I can appreciate it. It's not that big of a deal, but it would be nice if it was just like a one size fits all LFO modulator, LFO or random, or, you know, IMSEG or something else of the sort. And by all means, you don't need to use this. You can just pull one up here, but I don't know, that just maybe they needed to put something in there and I didn't really think about what that could be. If you all have suggestions about what this could replace, that would be interesting. I would like to know, but there's that. So that's pretty much it for the distortion and the filters. Let's go ahead and talk about one of the coolest features that I think is a sleeper. Databroth had to explain this to me, and thank God for Databroth, because he teaches me a lot of stuff that I don't know things about. But what this is a voice. How do I explain this? It's basically like, let's say you got unison. Well, between each unison voice, you can have individual effects. Let me explain. So if I were to just play this with all the unison on, this is what it sounds like. Not that, sorry, this. Now on paper, that probably doesn't seem that crazy, but what's happening here is if you look at the amount of voices that I have, which is 5, you'll see that I can actually modulate all of these per voice. And so it's one key, but one key is going to change the parameters of all the different voices that you have available. And that's freaking cool. That's not really something that I've seen a lot of. Maybe within Poly, if you're doing like, you know, the kilohertz thing, to where if you're playing multiple voices, then you can spread that out, which is available in this as well. But the fact that I can just hit one note and it's going to like spread everything into this like crazy modulation type deal, like so let's go ahead and do this again from scratch. Now that you hear that, we can kind of build this very quickly, but we can go into our voice control. We'll talk about the stack spread here in just a second. I've got one really cool use case for that. But let's say I switch this over. We've got 5 voices here. What I'm going to do on the first one is leave it alone. The second one, we're going to add some FM. Third voice, we're going to add some noise. Also turn up this. Maybe on this one, we're going to swap this out for a triangle. And then on this one, we'll bring in a saw wave and pull the triangle out. Or sorry, pull the square out. So this can be applied to third-party effects. It can be applied to anything that has a CC control, but as you can see, there's a lot of like really cool expression that you can get just from hitting one note. You can make chords with it if you want to. You can make just different types of timbres that are all going to play at the same time. You do got to be careful, because I think, excuse me, that this can get probably pretty crazy on CPU, especially if you're using third-party effects. But like, this is something that I never would have thought of, and I think it's really neat. So behind that, if we take a look at this cool little snare concept that I got going on, this is where we take a look at the, I don't remember what this is called, but it's the voice spread, I believe. And I've tried to use this on a few different things, and Databroth had to help me out with this. but I've been able to create kind of like a metallic tonality from creating these clusters if you modulate that to the pitch. So let me turn these off, and let me activate this and turn that off. So with this turned off, it's going to sound a little bit more tonal. See? But whenever we turn this on and we separate this to the pitch, what you can do on this is expand these out through exponential numbers or through just different, like it says primes, straight, flipped, reciprocals. So different mathematical expressions that really just go into whatever it is that you map it to. So if I were to turn this off, and then I were to grab another voice spread, stack spread, sorry, and I were to set this to the pitch by like 12, maybe let's do 19. Now take a look at how this is going to sound. So now we've got almost like a physical modeling type sound that we can manipulate further into lots of different things. Now, it doesn't have to necessarily be to the pitch. You can make it spread to other different controls or devices or whatever, but I find that the pitch is the most obvious to explain that, so you definitely just got to get in there and mess with it. But how cool is that? And let's go ahead and change these into different things and see how that changes the sound. You're getting like these really cool inharmonics on here. And you can do this with up to 16 voices. So when it comes into like making snares and stuff, you know, this isn't going to be anything super crazy, but if I were to kind of pull back on this just a bit, and then maybe adjust the noise on here, I think, because that's where this is going, I want to say. One of these is. There we go. So maybe just a hair of this. So, and then we can you can make some really cool like snare type sounds and get some interesting results just by putting the stack spread on that. Again, I have to give credit to Databroth because he was the one that explained this to me, but just as a means of putting this up and doing my own processing, that's a pretty neat deal. And I never would have thought to have done this. I didn't even really know what this was. It's pretty cool though, right? At least I think so. So we're pretty much almost done. There's a couple of things that we do want to take a look at. We now have some new metering. We also have a new mixer type overview where all of our functions are over here to the left, to where we can pull whatever it is that we want to back in. Devices, main controls, sends. This is the master, and then also effect tracks. You've got your ins and outs here, and then any tracks that are, or any like groups or anything that's deactivated, you can kind of just consolidate and make that show there. This is your AB in case if you like to do DJ type stuff. And then you've got your comments over here. So that's a really nice quality of life thing. The other thing that I'm not sure if you all have noticed or not, but it kind of like flew under the radar, but if you have stuff on here, the text is bolder. It seems like there's a little bit more contrast. And, oh wow, that's actually white. I don't remember that being white. Usually it's black. I wonder if all of them are going to be like that. Well, I think that's a bug because the last time that I was using this, everything was dark. But it would be cool just as a future wish list feature if the darker the color, the brighter the waveform became. I know that people still want those see-through things with the grid lines. I think that this is fine for me personally, but yeah, normally this is not white. But I'm not upset that it is. So if you look over here, you can see that it's black. Don't worry about it. It's just I think it's just a bug. But if that were the case, that would be pretty nice. And that's actually a really nice quality of life thing too, with the way that that fades out. So that's pretty sick. So finally, what we really want to talk about is the audio quantization, which I think for me is my favorite feature about this whole shebang. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into a loop or something. What I'm going to do is just pull something up from my sample pack with a rolling sampler. And we'll just find something that has a little bit of sounds to them and a little bit of stuff, and then we'll find something interesting. So this might be loud. Cool. If you look over on the left, we've got a couple of new things here. So we have this rate now, and within this rate we have a percentage. So if we were to loop this and set this here and go to the preview onsets, then we can actually change this to diminish or to be more or less sensitive to the blue here. As you can see this kind of changing. It's a little bit subtle, but look right here. You see how it kind of goes out? So bring some of them back. It's still a little bit finicky because very small percentages make this kind of move and work out. And I think that they're still working it out, but it is kind of nice. Now, speaking of, if we were to right click on this, we now have a normalize function, which is awesome. And then now we also have a quantize audio. And this is probably again, my favorite thing about this is that we can quantize these onsets in different ways to create different rhythms while it's non-destructive. Now, let me just explain why this is a big deal. Like before, you could actually do this, but what you would have to do is go slice this, right click, go to slice in place, then go to onsets. Now, this wasn't here before, but it is now, which is nice because it's a sensitivity marker. But once you do that, this will create these slices, and then you can quantize it. You don't have to do that anymore. You just go right-click, quantize audio, set it to how you want to. Let's give it some humanization. Let's give it some of that, maybe 1/16, and boom. Not a big deal, but you saw that it adjusted that over, and that's kind of nice. Let's go ahead and actually quantize some audio that is going to be played. So I'm going to grab this and go Command J. Sorry, on this one. There we go. And with that, I'm going to push back off. Let's go ahead and quantize this again. Let's maybe set this to triplets. And we're going to change the threshold to, 0 all the way. Set the humanization to 0. Shuffle to 0. Amount 100%. And not a whole lot happened, but you saw that there were a couple of adjustments that were pushed over. Maybe we can try to quantize this again to, 1/8, or maybe something a little bit more dramatic. Oh, also turning off the keep existing beat markers help a lot when you're trying to make something more dramatic. So there we go. Now, the reason why I think that this is so important for somebody like me is because once you start pitching this, or let's say you bounce this out, kind of like so, it's going to think a second, we're still in the beta, and you start to move things with a repitch further or closer, maybe something kind of like this. I'll just pull this out and go repitch, which I have a comment on that, but hold on one sec. So we pull this out. Well, then what we can do is we can start playing around with these odd different rhythms. And then what we can do is like kind of even do something where we're in this case of, I'm going to move this over. And what I did was now if we just take this part out all the way up until here, we've got ourselves a cool little rhythm. So and then we can keep messing around with this to try to find cool and interesting things that until we're happy with something. So it's a really awesome tool to start using to build rhythms with that were beyond just what the loop was itself. And now that we don't have to do all this cutting and whatnot, it saves us several clicks. That is a really big workflow enhancement. I think one thing that if I could ask that I would really love to see that I don't think would be too complicated to fix or to add is that if you look at the repitch mode, there's no way to pitch these samples. If you look at the raw, there's also no way to pitch these samples. And basically what I would request is a way to pitch the samples to where it would either make it later or longer without having to guess with the tempo. Because if you do have something that is tonal, you kind of have to guess to figure out what pitch it is. And like you can do it with an EQ and be like, oh, there's the fundamental or whatever, but it's kind of just more work than what it's worth sometimes. But aside from that, you all know me, like I've covered Bitwig for several years now, almost 4, coming on 5 years in 2024. And I really believe that Bitwig has like the best audio editing of any DAW. That's just my personal opinion. You can feel free to disagree with me. I know Cubase has offline editing, blah, 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 but as a means of workflow of bouncing, splicing things up, cutting, whatever. This is such an awesome addition for people that like to do resampling like me. And Bitwig, thank you so much for listening to our requests and implementing them in a way that makes sense to the Bitwig workflow. That's really cool. Now, I will say that there's a couple of other things that are added within this. So if we right click, you can see that we can slide the waveform to the next or the previous onset. So you'll see that it will kind of just nudge it. Maybe we can go to the next one. Boom. So that's kind of cool. And this is interesting because if you kind of slide this over, you'll see how it's kind of just like moving itself by these onsets. And what is happening here is that you've created, this is actually really big, you've created onsets that are stuck. And if I'm understanding this correctly, when you're moving this, you're pretty much scrubbing this into the next piece of the waveform. So let's take a listen to this. Right? Now let's go ahead and move the waveform again to the next one. So see? So it's kind of just like shifting everything over in such a way, and it's not necessarily maintaining the same pattern. As you can tell, it's a little bit different, but that's still really cool that we can kind of find variations like this without having to do this, without having to slide, and be like super duper. It's just a little bit easier to kind of work with in that way. So in any case, I think that is almost everything. I covered the new filters, the new distortions, the sweep, the audio editing, the quality of life updates with the solo and all that. Oh, there is a new synth. I forgot to mention that. So there is that we can cover quickly, which is the Byte. This isn't something that I would particularly use a lot of, but I think that it's a nice addition. That's pretty cool. But if we were to take a listen to this, we've got pulse width modulation. We can choose between all of these different waveforms here. It's also got this like cross FM and a sync on here. That's kind of cool. It's got ring modulation built into it. And then of course it has FM/phase modulation or syncing built into this here. So I think that these would be most useful for things like leads and maybe just like really hard synths that would be relatively monophonic. But that's not to say that you couldn't make other things with it. I just find that it would be cool to do that. You can also kind of warp or kind of like, I guess, mangle these waveforms here. So if we take this and kind of just mess with it here, it's almost kind of like a wavetable that's just one wavetable or a list that you can choose from. But it's kind of neat because I don't see the cross FM very often, also with the sync and whatnot. But yeah, I do think that should be everything that wraps this up as far as the larger quality of life improvements and whatnot. Now, I guess if I had a couple of more suggestions that I would like to see, I would like to see the grid have racks. So if we were to make a grid and we built a compressor or something, I would love to be able to highlight all of those and save those as like, something that I could pull up later. Because you can't have an effect rack, I guess you can have an effect grid within a grid, but it's two different layouts. And because of that, it's kind of frustrating that you have to like pull up an effects grid, copy all of the devices, and then move it over to the new thing, which you can do. It's just kind of lame and not very fun, but having the ability to kind of make those effect containers within the grid would be really cool, because you're starting to build on these components that can just keep getting bigger and bigger, and you don't have to go back and do everything from scratch. That would be super awesome. You just maybe have a connector that goes in, have a connector that goes out. Heck, if you want to make it even more crazy, make it third party. That'd be super sick. But aside from that, the audio editing thing with the pitching, I think those are like the major things that I would like to see improved in the future. If I had to be like super picky, I think that the dynamics and the limiter and the mixing tools as a whole could use a overhaul. That being said, I think that there's still some latency issues with the EQ Plus, which is a little bit of a bummer. I would love it also if they made the EQ Plus, instead of having to hold Option to control the resonance, like I have a trackpad, so it would be nice to just be able to use this with two fingers like I normally do. But aside from that, man, like these are all just tiny things, and I'm making music in this every day. And, these are just some, wishful suggestions that we would love to see improved in future iterations. I would love to know what your suggestions are in the comment section. I don't know if Bitwig is going to see this or not, but if they do, then it's just like, hey, this is what your customer base would love to see. So anyways, thank you all so much for hanging out with me for this new Bitwig journey. We covered quite a bit, but I really appreciate you all hanging out with me if you got to the end and, you know, just choosing my channel for this kind of information. If you all have any questions, let me know in the comments. Hit me up on the Discord. Again, check out those affiliate links or check out alchemy.com. You could also become a member. There's lots of ways to support this channel. And honestly, without your support, I would not be doing stuff like this video today. Thanks to Bitwig. You guys are awesome. Thank you to my members and thank you to my subscribers and my viewers. You guys are amazing. I will see you in the next one.